2 minutes ago, the palace releases a health update so carefully worded it feels like a warning, and so vague it feels like a confession. In this fictional reconstruction, the statement isn't just information, it's a signal that something inside the monarchy has shifted overnight. Phones start ringing. Advisors go quiet. And the public hears the same question in every syllable. How bad is it? But the real shock isn't what the palace says, it's what it refuses to say. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. This is where the docudrama premise locks in like a door clicking shut. Because an official statement in a monarchy isn't a simple update, it's an engineered object, built to hold back panic while pretending to offer clarity. And in this fictional telling, the wording is the first crime scene. Not the illness itself, not the diagnosis, not the private reality behind closed doors, just the language. What's included? What's missing? What's softened? What's carefully wrapped in phrases that can mean everything and nothing at the same time? The palace knows one brutal truth. People can forgive uncertainty, but they cannot tolerate feeling managed, so they manage anyway. Because the institution was designed to survive storms by controlling the narrative, not by surrendering it. The emotional stakes ripple outward immediately. Fear arrives first, but it wears a polite face. Sympathy follows, then suspicion. Because sympathy needs a story and the palace has offered a sketch instead of a picture. The public hunger for certainty becomes its own pressure, and pressure creates noise questions, theories, whispers that fill the gaps left by official restraint. That's why the update lands like an earthquake. Not because it says devastating directly, but because it doesn't. It hints. It gestures. It asks the public to trust the palace's calm without providing the details that would justify it. And when a palace asks for trust without proof, people don't assume privacy. They assume damage. Inside the household, the containment instinct kicks in with frightening speed. You can feel it in the sudden tightening of messaging, the repetition of approved phrases, the way certain words are avoided like they're cursed. You can feel it in the internal panic that never looks like panic, it looks like organization. Emergency meetings that aren't on the calendar. Senior staff suddenly unavailable. Advisors speaking in clipped, careful tones, as if every sentence is being recorded even when it isn't. In this dramatized reconstruction, nobody says crisis. They say coordination. Nobody says worry. They say planning. And those substitutions are the tell. Because the palace isn't built to be transparent, it's built to be stable, even if stability requires silence. That's where succession anxiety enters the room without being named. In the palace, there are words you don't say out loud, because saying them makes them real. So instead of succession, you hear continuity. Instead of replacement, you hear support. Instead of transition, you hear coverage. It's continuity planning, activated quietly, moving like a shadow behind the official update, not announced, not confirmed, just felt. People begin speaking about the near future in conditional tones, and conditional tones are how institutions prepare the public for change without admitting change is coming. In this fictional telling, the update isn't only about health, it's about the monarchy's ability to project certainty when certainty is slipping through its fingers. And then comes the final, destabilizing note 1 that makes the entire statement feel less like communication and more like containment. A trusted insider claims the update was rewritten at the last minute. Not edited for clarity, rewritten, reshaped under pressure, stripped of specifics, engineered to buy time. That single claim turns the statement into a battleground. Because if the palace rewrote the truth moments before releasing it, the public isn't just reading an update anymore. They're reading a negotiation between reality and survival. And they don't know who won. And to understand why this update lands like an earthquake, we have to unpack the palace's most dangerous skill, how it controls the story, while pretending it's simply sharing the facts. In public, monarchy speaks in calm. In private, it speaks in code. In this fictional thriller, every phrase in the health update is a pressure point designed to manage panic, soothe markets, and keep the institution standing. But coded language has a flaw. It invites interpretation. And interpretation becomes wildfire. Because when a palace won't describe the truth clearly, the public doesn't assume privacy. It assumes damage. And that's when the real crisis begins. Because coded reassurance is the palace's oldest craft, stable words used to mask unstable realities, delivered with practiced warmth and careful restraint. The statement doesn't say worse, it says ongoing. It doesn't say urgent, it says monitoring. It doesn't say uncertain, it says in consultation. Every phrase is designed to keep the world from tilting. And to a palace, that's not deception, it's governance. The institution treats public emotion as a resource to be managed, not a truth to be served. Sympathy must be encouraged, yes, but not allowed to turn into panic. Concern must be acknowledged, but not allowed to become doubt. So the update becomes a balancing act performed on a wire no one can see. That's the PR dilemma at the heart of this fictional crisis. Too honest and you trigger a stampede. Too vague and you invite suspicion. And suspicion, once it grows, becomes a second illness, one that spreads faster than facts can catch it. Inside the palace, competing advisors sharpen into opposing philosophies. Transparency advocates push for clarity, insisting trust is the only long-term currency. Containment loyalists argue that clarity can kill stability, and stability is the monarchy's first duty. The debate isn't just strategic, it's moral. Are you protecting a person by keeping details private, or protecting an institution by controlling perception? In this dramatized telling, the answer changes depending on who benefits from the confusion. And buried inside the statement is a timing cue meant to buy time, a phrase that sounds harmless but functions like a break. In the coming days. At the appropriate time. Further updates will follow. It isn't just scheduling language. It's a permission slip for silence, a cushion placed under the palace while it reorganizes behind the curtain. But the rumor economy doesn't respect cushions. It outpaces official messaging by design. Because rumors don't wait for confirmation, they feast on absence. Every gap in the statement becomes space for speculation. Every careful word becomes a clue people dissect like a riddle. And once people start solving riddles, they don't want answers. They want to be right. Then the cliffhanger hits with the kind of precision that makes everything feel unstable. A reporter receives a tip that contradicts the palace timeline. Not a full confession, just a detail, a date, a whisper that something happened earlier than the statement admits. And once a timeline is questioned, the next question becomes brutal. Who inside the palace is leaking, and what are they trying to force the monarchy to admit? In this fictional reconstruction, the update doesn't calm the storm, it feeds it. Because illness in a monarchy isn't just personal, it's political gravity. Within minutes, sources appear not to clarify, but to steer emotion. Sympathy here, doubt there, a hint of urgency, a hint of denial. And the palace learns its oldest lesson again. You can control the message, but you can't control the appetite for what you won't say. Leaks become warfare the moment official language turns cautious. Selective truths and strategic omissions are released like darts, enough to shape the public's feelings, not enough to create accountability. One source pushes reassurance, another pushes alarm. One frames the palace as protective, another frames it as evasive. And in the middle, the public is forced to choose which reality they trust, because the monarchy's vagueness has created competing realities that cannot both be true. That's how crises escalate in palaces, not through what is said, but through what people infer. Meanwhile, factions quietly use the moment to reposition power. Every advisor becomes more important. Every senior figure becomes more visible. Every absence becomes an opening for someone else to step forward and look steady. Inside the palace, blame starts circulating like poison. Who approved the statement? Who delayed it? Who softened it? Who insisted on those exact words that now look like concealment? The internal atmosphere becomes sleepless and brittle, staff fear rising, moral panic settling in, people second-guessing every email and every call. Because when your job depends on controlling a narrative, the worst nightmare is a narrative you can't control. In this dramatized world, the palace starts scanning for the smoking gun detail, the thing that, if exposed, would turn a guarded update into a scandal, a withheld symptom, a hidden trip, an unlogged consult, a moment that happened off record and now threatens to exist publicly. And then the institutional clamp arrives, cold and unmistakable. A message circulates internally. No one speaks without clearance. No one. Not staff, not aides, not courtiers. Silence becomes policy, enforced not by shouting, but by fear of consequence. But policies like that create the very thing they're trying to prevent: pressure. And pressure seeks exits. But once silence becomes policy, the people who cannot stay silent become the story, starting with the ones closest to the truth. When health becomes headline, the monarchy becomes a hierarchy of knowledge. In this fictional thriller, not everyone receives the same truth at the same time. Some hear reassurance, some hear urgency, some hear nothing at all. And that unequal access doesn't just hurt feelings, it creates suspicion. Because in a family that is also a state symbol, being kept out of the loop isn't an accident, it's a decision. And decisions like that create enemies. The knowledge tiers form instantly, like invisible ranks snapping into place. At the top are the briefed, the people who receive the most complete version, delivered in careful language with clear instructions. What to say, what not to say, what to prepare for. Below them are the managed, given enough information to perform calm, but not enough to challenge strategy. And then there are the excluded, kept on a diet of official phrasing, told just enough to prevent them from panicking, but not enough to prevent them from guessing. In this dramatized reconstruction, that gap between what is known and what is performed becomes the most dangerous space in the palace, because speculation thrives where honesty is rationed. The emotional fallout is immediate and personal. Fear doesn't stay abstract when it's your family. It turns into resentment when you sense you're being handled. It turns into anger when you realize someone chose to protect the institution's image before protecting your right to know. And the monarchy's cruel design makes it worse. Even private pain has public consequences, so every emotional reaction feels like a risk. The ethical question hangs over everything like a weight no one can lift. Privacy versus duty to the public. Because if the public is being asked to trust stability, don't they deserve clarity? But if clarity causes panic, isn't silence a kind of protection? In this fictional telling, there's no clean answer, only competing fears and the cold math of survival. The palace's continuity table appears in the background of the story like a ghostly blueprint planning that feels cold but necessary. Decisions arranged not by affection, but by optics and capability. Who can step forward without causing alarm? Who can speak and be believed? Who can appear calm enough to make the public breathe again? And the loneliest part is that leadership here requires emotional sacrifice. Compassion must be rationed. Reassurance must be engineered. Even grief must wait its turn, because the institution can't afford visible fragility. In this dramatized world, the family learns a brutal lesson. The crown doesn't just sit on heads, it sits on hearts too. That's where the foreshadowing sharpens. Someone feels sidelined and becomes a potential leak, not necessarily out of malice, but out of hurt. Because being excluded is humiliating in any family. In this family, it's also political. The more someone feels erased from the truth, the more tempted they become to create their own version of it. And then the cliffhanger lands, cutting through the palace calm like a knife. A family member reportedly asks, Why wasn't I told earlier? The question doesn't just reveal pain. It exposes fracture. It tells you trust is cracking in the only place trust truly matters. And that question cracks open the next layer, because once trust fractures at the top, the monarchy's real emergency isn't health. It's legitimacy. The palace will never say succession panic. In this fictional reconstruction, it doesn't have to, because you can feel it in how fast decisions start moving. Meetings multiply. Roles shift. Schedules change. And people begin speaking about the future in careful, conditional phrases. That's when the public realizes something terrifying. The health update wasn't the event. It was the trigger. Because the moment continuity becomes uncertain, everyone starts preparing for a different monarchy. Continuity planning starts to look like governance but feel like replacement. It's framed as support, more appearances by others, more assistance, more coverage, yet each adjustment whispers the same unspoken message. The center may not hold. Inside the palace, the conflict becomes sharper than any press storm. Protect dignity versus prepare publicly. Protect the person by keeping details private, or protect the institution by ensuring the public never senses hesitation. But the public senses it anyway. Stability narrative begins to wobble, because wobble isn't always visible in the words, it's visible in the choreography. Too many stand-ins confirm severity, even if no one admits it. Too much reassurance becomes suspicious. Too much silence becomes frightening. That's where the power struggle forms over who becomes the face of reassurance. Not because anyone wants the role, but because whoever becomes the face becomes the implied future. Legacy messaging begins at the same time, shaping how history will remember this moment before the moment has even finished happening. Phrases get tested. Themes get selected. Strength, service, continuity. The palace tries to build a narrative bridge in real time while the ground is still shaking, and then the line drops that turns planning into a psychological pivot. A senior advisor allegedly says, "We need a new center of gravity." It isn't just strategy, it's an admission. It suggests the monarchy is already moving its weight, already preparing for the public to follow a different focal point. And once the palace starts searching for a new center of gravity, the next battlefield becomes public optics, because optics decide whether the transition feels smooth or suspicious. You've seen the calm smiles and practiced warmth, but in this fictional reconstruction, every appearance becomes camouflage. The palace can't reveal too much without feeding panic, so it performs stability instead. But stability performed too hard starts to look like fear. Every pairing becomes a signal. Every separation becomes a story. And the public begins reading the monarchy like a thriller, searching faces for clues, timing for tells, and silence for guilt. Because optics choreography is the palace's second language. Placements, pairings, omissions, tiny choices that say more than any statement ever could. Who stands closest to whom becomes an argument in the public's mind. Who is absent becomes an accusation. Who speaks becomes a signal of whose voice matters now. And the palace, trapped between privacy and panic, tries to maintain a smooth surface while its internal machinery shifts underneath. It speaks in reassurance, but the reassurance is too perfect, so perfect it feels engineered. A line repeats across platforms with uncanny precision. A phrase lands like it was tested in a room before it was released to the world. And that's when suspicion ignites, because people can forgive fear, but they don't forgive being managed. Silence becomes its own weapon. Denials that deny nothing. Ambiguity that invites speculation. Carefully framed non-answers that keep the palace legally safe but emotionally exposed. And once ambiguity is in the bloodstream, the public reaction accelerates, sympathy surges. Outrage follows, conspiracy appetite grows, because the gap between what's happening and what we're being told feels too wide. In this dramatized telling, the palace tries to correct course with more choreography, more appearances, more messages, more carefully curated calm, but every added performance looks like proof that there's something to hide. The crowd begins watching foretells the way juries watch witnesses, a pause, a glance, a timing shift, a schedule change that doesn't feel routine. And the risk is brutal. One protocol slip can confirm the worst interpretations. Too many stand-ins imply severity. Too few imply avoidance. Any change becomes a story. Then the cliffhanger snaps into place with the kind of inevitability that makes you realize the palace is no longer steering the narrative is steering the palace. An unexpected cancellation hits the schedule, forcing a reshuffle no one can hide. The kind of reshuffle that turns support into replacement in the public imagination, whether that's fair or not. The palace can't explain without escalating fear. It can't stay silent without escalating suspicion. And that reshuffle forces the palace into its most dangerous phase, because now it must choose who speaks for the crown, and who gets blamed if the story collapses. Nothing fractures a royal household faster than a crisis that can't be controlled. In this fictional thriller, the health update doesn't unite the palace, it exposes it. Protectors want silence. Traditionalists want protocol. Modernizers want transparency. Opportunists want leverage. And the cruel truth is this: everyone claims they're protecting the monarchy, while quietly positioning themselves for whatever comes next. Because when the crown wobbles, even loyalty becomes strategy. The factions aren't official. They don't meet in named committees. They reveal themselves in speed and hesitation: who pushes to lock down information, who insists on formal procedure, who argues for clarity before rumors calcify, who watches quietly and calculates what they can gain. Protectors talk about dignity and stability, but their real aim is to control the pace of revelation. Traditionalists cling to protocol like it's oxygen, believing rules will keep the institution upright even if feelings are shredded. Modernizers push transparency not out of kindness, but out of fear that silence will be interpreted as deception, and deception will damage legitimacy more than truth ever could. Opportunists don't care which argument wins, they care who owes them afterward. Slipping advice and support into the right channels while collecting invisible debts. Leaks become warfare again, sharper and more targeted. Selective sympathy. Selective blame. Timed sources designed to soften one camp's image while sharpening another's. Access is power, and access becomes contested territory. Who briefs senior royals? Who controls schedules? Who gates meetings? Who gets to shape the tone of the story before it hardens into public belief? The emotional fault line widens because loyalties shift out of fear, not conviction, fear of being associated with the wrong side if the situation worsens, fear of being blamed for mishandling the update, fear of being seen as the person who panicked the country. And that fear is exactly how scapegoats are made. Because in this dramatized world, a trap begins to form. Someone will be sacrificed for mishandling the update. It's the cleanest way to restore confidence without admitting deeper failure. Find a face. Find a job title. Find a scapegoat who can absorb the rage while the institution claims it has learned lessons. Meanwhile, the stakes expand beyond family drama into a national confidence test. The public isn't just watching for health updates anymore, it's watching for competence, honesty, and control. And then the final cliffhanger drops like a sealed envelope on a table. A rumor surfaces of a private memo titled, "Next Steps." Not a phrase, not a plan in discussion, a memo. Written. Real. And once next steps exist on paper, the palace's final move is inevitable. A closed-door summit where the truth can't be softened anymore. What happens when the palace has to discuss something it can't publicly explain? In this fictional climax, ceremony collapses behind closed doors and the real monarchy appears. Strategic, frightened, furious. The health update sits in the center like a live wire. Some demand containment, others demand honesty, and the institution demands silence. Then the question that changes everything is asked out loud. Are we protecting a person or protecting the crown? It's a summit built for damage control, minimal staff, maximum consequences, and the atmosphere is so tight it feels like everyone is holding their breath at the same time. No speeches, no grand declarations, just the brutal mathematics of survival being done in human voices. Compassion collides with institutional instinct in real time. One side argues for honesty because they believe legitimacy is built on trust, and trust can't survive a vacuum. Another side argues for containment because they believe panic is contagious, and markets, morale, and public confidence don't respond well to uncertainty. And the palace, in this dramatized telling, doesn't treat those arguments as moral positions. It treats them as risk profiles. What does clarity cost? What does vagueness cost? Which version of the truth stabilizes the day and which version destroys the decade? Moral ambiguity thickens the room. Nobody is clean. Everyone is calculating, even when they sound sincere. The people demanding silence insist they're protecting the person at the center of the update, shielding dignity from spectacle. The people demanding openness insist they're protecting the crown from the long-term rot of distrust. And both sides, in their own way, are right, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because when both sides are right, the choice becomes less about ethics and more about power. Who gets to decide what protection means? Who gets to decide which pain is acceptable? Who gets to decide what the country is allowed to know? Then the escalation twist hits mid-meeting, turning the room colder. New information arrives, something that shifts power instantly. A detail about timing. A piece of paper that wasn't supposed to exist. A note from a doctor, a log from an aide, a confirmation that the 2-minute statement was preceded by hours of debate. Whatever it is in this fictional reconstruction, it changes the posture of everyone around the table, because it suggests the update wasn't simply crafted for the public. It was crafted to control internal fallout too. And if that's true, then this isn't only a health crisis. It's a governance crisis. That's when the palace makes the decision it always makes, when fear becomes louder than principle. It chooses a face of stability. Not necessarily the most compassionate, not necessarily the most honest, the most usable. The person who can absorb public attention without cracking, who can reassure without over-promising, who can stand in the spotlight and make uncertainty look like strength. And the instant that choice is made, resentment sparks. Because choosing a face is choosing a future. It elevates one figure and sidelines another. It creates a winner and a witness. And witnesses, in palaces, do not stay quiet forever. The meeting ends with the line that freezes everything into place, an ultimatum. Delivered not with anger but with finality. If this goes public, the next step won't be gentle. It's a warning dressed as policy. A reminder that the institution has tools it will use to protect itself. Careers can vanish. Access can be revoked. Narratives can be rewritten. And once an ultimatum exists, everyone understands the truth. The palace has moved from managing a story to enforcing an outcome. Because once an ultimatum exists inside a monarchy, the end game is never about feelings, it's about outcomes. If you think the story ends with the statement, you've missed the real ending, what the palace does afterward. In this fictional epilogue, order returns, but it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like containment with a polished surface. Protocol tightens. Messaging hardens. Trust erodes quietly. And beneath the restored calm, a final twist suggests the devastating update wasn't the crisis, it was the doorway into a new monarchy that had already started forming. A new order settles in with an eerie smoothness, disciplined messaging, harsher boundaries, fewer unguarded moments. Public sympathy rises, but inside the walls, trust fractures. People remember who argued for what, who pushed silence, who pushed honesty, who benefited from vagueness. And as the palace performs calm, It rewrites history in real time through controlled statements, shaping not just the present narrative but the future memory of this moment. Key figures' roles expand quietly under the banner of support, and the public watches familiar faces become more central, not knowing whether this is temporary assistance or permanent shift. That's the monarchy's paradox. Secrecy restores order, but corrodes legitimacy. The institution survives the day by controlling what can be said, but it mortgages tomorrow by teaching people that the official story is always negotiable. Seeds for future episodes appear in what disappears: a vanished memo, a reassigned aide, a missing timeline detail that no one can explain without admitting it mattered. Then, the final twist arrives like a whispered line recovered from a private note. Phase 1 was the update itself. Not the illness, not the meeting, the update. As if the statement wasn't just communication, but a strategic move designed to test reactions, shift attention, and reposition the monarchy's center of gravity before anyone could stop it. And if a 2-minute statement can shift the monarchy's center of gravity overnight, the real question isn't what was said, it's what else the palace is willing to reshape next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.